The morning Grace found the account empty. She was still wearing her engagement ring. She had woken up early, the way she always did on days when something important was supposed to happen, her body alert before her mind caught up. The final supplier payment was due. The keys to the new location were being handed over at noon. 5 years of work was supposed to become something real today, something she could touch and stand inside and call hers. She had fallen asleep the night before with the kind of quiet joy that only comes when a person finally believes they have made it through the hard part. She made tea. She opened her laptop. She typed in the password they had set up together, the one that used both their initials, and she looked at the balance. 0. She refreshed the page. 0. She checked the transaction history and found a single withdrawal, processed at 2:17 in the morning, every dollar transferred to an account number she had never seen in her life. $93,000. Gone. She sat at the kitchen table and read the number over and over as though repetition might change it, as though she was misreading something, as though there was a version of this that made sense. Then she walked to the bedroom. Daniel's passport was missing from the drawer. 3 shirts gone from the wardrobe. His shoes, the good ones he wore when he wanted to impress people, absent from the rack by the door. And on his pillow, folded once, was a note written in his handwriting, the same handwriting she had loved for 5 years, the same hand that had signed their business documents and written her name on birthday cards and held hers in hospital waiting rooms. Grace. I'm sorry. Don't look for me. This is the only way out. She read it 4 times. Then she sat on the floor. She did not call the bank first. She did not call the police. She called her sister Amora, and when Amora picked up, Grace said nothing for almost a full minute. Just breathed. And Amora, who knew her sister the way only a younger sibling can know someone, by sound, by silence, by the particular quality of the air between words, said, "I'm coming right now," and hung up without waiting for a response. Daniel was already 30,000 feet in the air. He had booked the flight 3 weeks earlier under a slight variation of his name, 1 letter transposed, easy to explain if questioned, difficult enough to search if someone was looking in a hurry. He had planned this the way he planned everything he was serious about, methodically, quietly, with a version of himself he kept separate from the one Grace knew. The gambling debt had started small 2 years ago, the way all catastrophic things start small, and had grown in the dark while he smiled across dinner tables and signed business agreements and told Grace they were almost there. The men he owed did not send reminders. They sent a man to stand outside the office one Tuesday afternoon until Daniel came out, and the conversation that followed lasted for minutes and changed everything. He had told himself he was protecting her. That taking the money and disappearing was cleaner than what those men would eventually do if he stayed. He had told himself this so many times in the preceding weeks that by the time he was sitting in the window seat watching the city shrink beneath him, he had almost built it into something that resembled a reason. Almost. He ordered water. Kept his phone off. In the overhead compartment was a carry-on with 2 changes of clothes, a laptop, and access to $93,000 sitting in a new account he had opened 6 weeks ago in Houston. The city was deliberate. Large enough to disappear in. Far enough from everyone who knew his face. And there was a man there named Victor Osei, a serious, well-connected entrepreneur assembling investors for a logistics venture, who had agreed to meet him by the end of the week. Daniel had studied Victor's background carefully enough to know the opportunity was real. Victor did not know Daniel's full history. That was exactly how Daniel needed it. The flight landed at 6:40 in the evening. Daniel took a taxi to the furnished apartment he had rented remotely, dropped his bag, and stood at the window looking out at a skyline that did not know his name yet. He told himself this was a beginning. Back home, Amora arrived to find Grace still on the bedroom floor. She read the note. She looked at the laptop screen. She sat beside her sister and put both arms around her and said nothing for a long time because the situation had already said everything. When Grace finally spoke, her voice was stripped of everything except the bare fact of what had happened. He took all of it, Amora. Every cent. The supplier payments, the deposit on the new location, the emergency fund. Everything we saved for 5 years. Amora held her tighter. The contracts are already signed. We owe money we don't have. There is no business anymore. Grace's voice did not break. It went somewhere worse than breaking, it went flat, the way a voice goes when the person using it has passed through shock and arrived somewhere on the other side of it. He's been planning this. The note says don't look for him. He planned this while we were eating dinner together. While we were talking about the future. She looked at the ring on her finger for a long moment. Then she took it off and set it on the nightstand beside the note and did not look at it again. Amara filed the police report herself the next morning because Grace could not stand up for long enough to get dressed. The detective was kind and honest in equal measure. He told them that without knowing the destination, with a name that was likely altered, with a transfer to an account that would be emptied and closed, the chances of a quick recovery were low. He took the note. He took the account details. He told them he would be in touch. Grace rebuilt the only way she knew how, slowly, and without asking anyone for more than she absolutely needed. She found a kitchen job within 2 weeks, early morning shift at a catering company that paid barely enough but kept her hands busy and her mind pointed forward. She moved out of the apartment she and Daniel had shared because she could not afford it alone and because every corner of it held something she was not ready to look at. She moved into Amara's spare room and brought almost nothing with her. She did not speak Daniel's name for 6 weeks. Victor Osei was not what Daniel had expected. He had built a picture of the man from his online profile, polished, corporate, the kind of entrepreneur who spoke in projections and percentages and kept everything at a professional distance. But the man who stood up from the restaurant table to greet him on Thursday evening was warm in a way that immediately put Daniel off balance. He had a broad smile and eyes that were still and attentive in a way that made you feel, uncomfortably, that he was reading more than your words. He was dressed simply. He ordered food like a man who knew exactly what he wanted. And within 20 minutes of sitting across from him, Daniel understood that Victor Osei had not built what he built by being fooled easily. Which was why Daniel was careful. He kept his story tight. Former business partner. Logistics background. Looking to reinvest capital after a recent exit. He had rehearsed the language until it sounded like memory rather than construction, and he delivered it smoothly, watching Victor's face for any shift in expression. Victor nodded. Asked precise questions. Listened to the answers completely before responding. By the end of the meal, the conversation had moved into the specifics of the venture, supply chain infrastructure, regional expansion, projected timelines, and Daniel felt the relief of familiar ground, the comfort of talking about something he actually understood. He had always been good at business. That had never been the problem. They shook hands in the car park at the end of the evening. Victor told him he would be in touch by Monday with the formal investment documents. Daniel drove back to his apartment with the window down, the warm Houston air moving through the car, and allowed himself, for the first time since he had stepped off the plane, to believe that the worst was behind him. He did not see Victor standing in the car park long after he had driven away, phone pressed to his ear, speaking quietly to someone on the other end of the line. He did not hear what Victor said. He did not know that Victor Osei had recognized the name Daniel Ashford the moment it appeared in his inbox 3 weeks earlier, not from the logistics world, not from any business network, but from a conversation he had never forgotten, in a city he had visited 4 years ago, sitting across a dinner table from a man named Professor Lawrence Mensah who had described, in quiet and devastated detail, how a former student had stolen his research, published it under his own name, reported him to the university board on fabricated grounds, and walked away while Lawrence lost everything he had spent 20 years building. The student's name had been Daniel Ashford. Victor had filed it away the way he filed everything, carefully, completely, with no immediate plan but with the certainty that the world was smaller than people who did wrong things like to believe. And when that same name appeared in his inbox attached to an investment inquiry, Victor had not deleted it. He had responded. He had arranged the meeting. And he had spent the intervening weeks making 2 phone calls that Daniel could not have imagined. The first was to Professor Lawrence Mensah. The second was to a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Grace got the call on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after she had stopped saying Daniel's name out loud. She was in the middle of a prep shift, hands deep in work, when her phone buzzed against the metal counter. She almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar, a Houston area code she didn't recognize, and she had learned in the past weeks to be careful with unfamiliar things. But something made her step outside and answer it. The man on the other end introduced himself as Victor Ose. He spoke calmly and got to the point quickly, which she appreciated because she did not have the emotional reserves for anything slow. He told her he was a businessman in Houston. He told her that a man named Daniel Ashford had recently approached him for an investment opportunity. He told her that before proceeding he had done what he always did, looked carefully, and that what he had found had led him, through a chain of connections he would explain in full if she was willing to listen to her. Grace stood outside the kitchen door in her apron and said nothing for a moment. "How do you know about me?" she asked. "Because Daniel made a mistake," Victor said. "He ran to the wrong city." He explained everything. Professor Mensah. The research theft. The years of careful rebuilding that Lawrence had done in Houston, where Victor had met him and where they had become, over time, close friends. He explained that when Daniel's name surfaced he had not acted impulsively, he had verified, documented, and contacted the right people first. The private investigator had already traced the account Daniel had used for the transfer. The funds were not gone. They had moved once but not far enough. There was a legal process now in motion that Grace needed to be part of. "I need you to come to Houston," Victor said. Grace looked at the ring finger on her left hand, still bare, still slightly pale where the ring had sat for 3 years. "When?" she said. "As soon as you can." She went back inside, untied her apron, and told her supervisor she had a family emergency. It was not entirely untrue. Daniel received the investment documents from Victor on Monday as promised. He read through them carefully, made 2 small annotations, signed where indicated, and sent them back within the hour. By Wednesday he had received confirmation that his application had been accepted and that the formal onboarding meeting would take place Friday morning at Victor's office downtown. He dressed well for it. He arrived 7 minutes early. He was shown to a conference room on the 14th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and offered coffee by a receptionist who smiled professionally and closed the door behind her. He waited. The door opened 5 minutes later. Victor walked in first. Behind him was a man Daniel had not seen in 4 years but recognized instantly, Professor Lawrence Mensah, older, quieter, with an expression that was not angry but was somehow worse than anger. It was settled. It was the face of a man who had waited a long time for a moment and had decided exactly how he wanted to occupy it. Daniel stood up. He sat back down. Then the second door on the far side of the conference room opened, and Grace walked in. She was not crying. She was not shaking. She was dressed simply, her hands at her sides, and she looked at him the way you look at something you once thought was precious and have since had to completely relearn your feelings about, with a clarity that had been purchased at great cost. She crossed the room, sat down directly across from him, and placed a folder on the table between them. "The investigator found the account," she said. "Every transfer is documented. The fraud case is already filed. Your name, both versions of it, is in the system." She pushed the folder an inch closer to him. "This is your only option now. Sign it, and I won't pursue the criminal charge. Don't sign it, and I will." Daniel looked at Lawrence. Lawrence said nothing. He looked at Victor. Victor looked back at him with the steady patience of a man who had already won. Daniel looked at Grace last. He opened his mouth once and closed it again, because there was no version of any sentence that was going to help him now. The city he had run to had known his name before he arrived. The opportunity he had walked into had been a door held open specifically for him. And the woman sitting across from him, whom he had left on the floor of the apartment with nothing, had walked into this room on her own 2 feet and laid everything out without raising her voice once. He picked up the pen. He signed. Grace flew home 2 days later with the full amount restored, a formal agreement in place, and something harder to name but more important than money, the knowledge that she had faced the worst thing that had ever happened to her and had not been destroyed by it. Victor called her 3 weeks later with a proposition that had nothing to do with Daniel. He had a catering division attached to his logistics group that had never reached its potential. He had watched how she handled herself in that conference room. He needed a partner who was serious, disciplined, and had already proven she could rebuild from nothing. Grace listened to the full offer before she said anything. Then she said yes. If this story moved you the way it moved us building it, hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss what we put out next. And drop a comment below, would you have signed that paper, or would you have pressed the criminal charge? Tell us what you would have done. We read every single one.